They laughed at him, mocked his skin color, and treated him like he didn't belong at their golden table. But just 10 minutes later, their entire empire shook, because the man they humiliated was about to pull the plug on a $50 billion deal. Marcus Ellington, the visionary CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the world, stepped into the glittering ballroom of the Harrington family estate with quiet confidence. His tailored black suit reflected not only elegance but years of hard work and perseverance. The Harringtons, a billionaire family with deep ties in global finance, had invited him to finalize what was set to be the largest deal of his career, a $50 billion merger that would shake the entire industry. Marcus had spent months negotiating terms, flying across countries, and ensuring his company's future was secure. But the moment he walked in, the tone shifted. Whispered voices rippled through the crowd, eyes narrowing, some smirking. At the long marble table, Richard Harrington, the patriarch, leaned back in his chair, sizing Marcus up as though he were an intruder rather than a partner. "You've come a long way from the streets," Richard said with a mocking grin, his words sharp enough to slice through the polished atmosphere. Laughter followed from a few around the table. Marcus kept his composure, his calm expression betraying none of the fire building inside him. He had faced prejudice before, but this was different. This was blatant humiliation, delivered in front of peers and potential allies. Another family member scoffed at his background, dismissing his achievements as luck rather than brilliance. Marcus didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. He simply observed, noting every insult, every condescending glance. To them, he was just a man who didn't belong in their gilded world. What they didn't realize was that he held the power to decide their future with a single signature, or with none at all. And as the laughter echoed across the hall, Marcus quietly began making a decision that would change everything. Marcus sat in the back of the police cruiser, the metal cuffs digging deeper into his wrists every time the car hit a bump. Through the tinted glass, he watched familiar streets roll past, streets where he had grown up, streets where he had worked hard to build a name for himself. Now, every face that glanced at the passing squad car would see only a suspect. His phone vibrated in his pocket, but his hands were bound, and one of the officers quickly took it, tossing it onto the dashboard without a word. The station smelled of stale coffee and old paper when they dragged him inside, leading him past rows of desks and into a cramped interrogation room. They didn't offer him water, didn't tell him his rights, didn't even bother to ask for his side of the story. Instead, one officer leaned across the table, slamming down a blurry security camera still. The man in the image wore a hoodie, face half covered, but to them that was enough. Marcus studied the photo, the corners of his mouth tightening. "That's not me," he said firmly. The younger officer scoffed, muttering something under his breath about stories they all tell. Marcus took a slow breath. Years in business had taught him the value of staying calm under pressure. But this wasn't a boardroom, and these weren't negotiators. Still, there was one advantage he had that they didn't know about. As the older officer stepped out, Marcus looked directly at the remaining cop. "Before you make a mistake you can't undo," he said evenly. "I suggest you let me make one phone call." The officer smirked, clearly amused. "And who are you going to call? A lawyer?" Marcus held his gaze unblinking. "Something like that," he replied. Deep down, he already knew this single call would change everything. The laughter had barely died down when Marcus's phone buzzed on the table, its sharp vibration echoing through the silence. Every eye turned toward him, expecting embarrassment, maybe even an apology for breaking the decorum of their so-called elite circle. But Marcus calmly reached for it, his expression unchanging. He glanced at the screen, then slowly set the phone down without answering, a faint smile tugging at his lips. That simple gesture unsettled them more than any heated response could have. It was a reminder that Marcus's world extended far beyond this room, far beyond their approval. Leaning back in his chair, he observed the family now whispering among themselves, confused by his composure. They had expected a man eager to please, desperate for their acceptance. Instead, they saw someone who didn't need it. With deliberate calm, Marcus folded his napkin, placed it neatly beside his plate, and stood. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he moved toward the head of the table. The Harrington patriarch raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Leaving so soon? We haven't even discussed the terms," he said, his tone dripping with superiority. Marcus looked directly at him, his gaze sharp but measured. "There are no terms," he said quietly, yet his words cut through the air like steel. "This meeting was supposed to be about partnership. But respect is the foundation of any deal, and tonight, I've seen there's none here." The room froze. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks with steady hands, then picked up his phone and walked toward the door. His calm presence carried more weight than their billions. As the heavy doors closed behind him, the Harringtons exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, doubt crept into their arrogance. They had underestimated him, and now they would pay the price. Marcus Brown had just stepped out of a cozy neighborhood coffee shop, the rich smell of roasted beans still clinging to his jacket, when his world suddenly shifted. A sharp screech of tires cut through the calm morning, and two police cruisers swerved to a stop beside him. Before he could even take a step, two uniformed officers jumped out, hands on their weapons, shouting for him to raise his hands. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, startled, but the question only seemed to agitate them further. They closed in, one gripping his arm roughly, twisting it behind his back while the other patted him down. Passers-by slowed, their curious stares quickly turning to concerned glances. Some took out their phones, recording the scene. Marcus, dressed in a crisp navy suit and polished shoes, looked every bit the professional man he was, but the officers treated him like a dangerous fugitive. "We got our guy," one muttered with smug satisfaction. The accusation came next, an armed robbery at a store just a few blocks away. Marcus blinked in disbelief. He had been in that coffee shop for nearly an hour, chatting with the barista, yet they didn't ask a single question about where he had been. Instead, they spoke over him, their tone laced with condescension, as if his voice didn't matter. Marcus tried to explain, calmly insisting they had the wrong man. But the more he spoke, the less they seemed to listen. They shoved him toward the cruiser, cuffing his wrists tightly, the cold metal biting into his skin. In that moment, it wasn't the arrest itself that stung the most. It was the look in their eyes. They had already decided who he was before they even knew his name, and nothing he said seemed able to change that. The morning after the deal collapsed, financial news outlets exploded with headlines. "Harrington Empire in crisis," read one. Another splashed across every screen. "CEO Marcus Hayes pulls out of historic $50 billion agreement." Stock prices for the Harrington conglomerate plummeted overnight, wiping billions off their value. Investors demanded answers, board members held emergency calls, and whispers of a hostile takeover rippled through Wall Street. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his corner office, sunlight streaming across his polished desk, as calm as ever. His assistant entered, placing a stack of newspapers before him. Marcus glanced at them briefly before setting them aside. "Schedule the meeting with the Tokyo partners," he said evenly. "We move forward without hesitation." His company's future was brighter than ever, because respect was at the core of every partnership he built. Across town, the Harrington family held a tense, silent breakfast. Their arrogance from the previous night had vanished, replaced by grim faces and bitter regret. The patriarch finally spoke, his voice strained. "We underestimated him." But the truth was harsher. They hadn't just underestimated Marcus, they had disrespected him. And the cost of that mistake was now clear for the world to see. Back in his office, Marcus looked out at the skyline, a quiet strength in his eyes. He hadn't raised his voice, he hadn't fought to prove himself. He had simply walked away, and the power of that choice echoed louder than any argument ever could. For Marcus, the lesson was simple. Dignity is never negotiable. And for the Harringtons, the message was permanent. Humiliation may last minutes, but the consequences of arrogance can last a lifetime. The game had changed, and Marcus had made sure everyone knew exactly who held the real power. If the story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts. Subscribe to Black Stories for more powerful and inspiring stories every week.